Fernando Mendoza has arrived. Indiana lost their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, to graduation, right? Or at least they will. So Rourke is going to graduate, and Taven Jackson, is going to go into the transfer portal. We saw both of them play for this team earlier in the year. Curtis Rourke, of course, was injured for a game. Taven Jackson came in against Washington. He was very successful. Both of those quarterbacks leaving. So Curtis Rourke graduates. He had 1 year of eligibility left after he transferred in from Ohio. Taven Jackson's going in the transfer portal. But Fernando Mendoza from Cal is coming to Indiana, which is a fantastic add and a gold star on this transfer portal class. He had 3,000 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions last season with the Golden Bears. He's a top 3 quarterback in this transfer portal class so far. And, critically, he has 2 seasons of eligibility remaining. Cignetti only had Rourke for 1 year. Last year was really a 1-year experiment, and this year they're going to have to do a lot of reloading, and we're going to talk about that in the next segment as well. They're really going to have to reload to put together a team capable of high amounts of success again, because the majority of their team last year was transfers and the majority of them were seniors. So it was a 1-year experiment, a 1-year project. Indiana went to the playoffs, right? Had 2 losses, ended the year 11-2. Incredible year for Cignetti, a historic year for Indiana, and now they need to reload. And the number one position they needed to reload was quarterback, because again, Curtis Rourke's going to leave. Taven Jackson decides to pack it up as well. Fernando Mendoza comes in, joins his brother Alberto Mendoza, a freshman at IU this past season, and Tyler Cherry as well out of Center Grove. Fernando Mendoza comes to Indiana and starts this reload process as IU looks to really achieve a similar amount of success next year as they did this past year. So again, 3,000 yards, 16 touchdowns, and 6 interceptions for Mendoza last season. The team went 6-6, but 5 of those losses were by 1 possession, and they got real close against teams like Miami, right? Mendoza had a large part in that almost victory. He was celebrated and adored by the Cal fan base, and now he looks to carry that hype over to the Indiana Hoosiers. Both him and Rourke are pocket passing types, right? Neither one has a particularly substantial presence on the ground, which I find fascinating and I find significant, right? Mendoza is more mobile and he's capable under pressure. So if he's under fire, he's able to move around a bit more. He can run. He just hasn't been schemed up to run when he was at Cal. So he is mobile. He can scramble. He can throw from outside the pocket. And sure, Curtis Rourke can do those things too. I just think, based on what I've seen, Mendoza can do it better. He could be schemed to success on the ground. I think Cignetti and this coaching staff could, if there's going to be designed quarterback runs, if there's going to be speed option or read option opportunities or any form of play action, I think Mendoza can be schemed into success there. I think he has the play style that could imply that he has the ability to succeed in those areas. He threw for a similar amount of yards to Rourke, just over 3,000, but he was at Cal, and now he's going to be facing these Big Ten defenses. I think that he's a very capable, talented, and a spectacular starting quarterback. It may take him a second or two to adjust to a new roster scheme and program, but the next season starts off soft, right? The schedule starts with Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, Illinois, at Iowa, a bye week, and then Oregon on the road. So similar opportunities to Rourke is what Mendoza will have to ease into a more strenuous schedule. That brings up my number one concern about Mendoza, and that is the strenuous Big Ten schedule. Mendoza, and again, we're comparing him to Rourke in a lot of ways because their play styles are similar and they both transferred in for their first year starting at Indiana. Mendoza hasn't faced a defense as proficient as Oregon or Penn State's ever. He was at Cal. The best team he played against was Miami. They lost by 1, but Miami wasn't exactly known for their defense in the same way that Oregon and Penn State are. 2 top 10 defenses across the board, run defense, pass defense. Oregon and Penn State are incredible. They're in the top 4 in the college football playoff rankings. They're both in the college football playoff, and their defense has a large reason. It is a large reason for that. So sure, Mendoza's going to have opportunities against Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, and more, and some of those weaker Big Ten opponents to ease himself into the offense, the scheme, get used to his receivers, get used to his offensive line. And yes, he performed well in the game against Auburn, but there's still another gear to the elite caliber, the elite tier of college football defense that Mendoza just hasn't been exposed to yet, right? Indiana goes to Oregon and to Penn State next season. Those are their 2 toughest games. It's arguable that Indiana will be favored to and expected to win every single game on their schedule except for those 2. And those are 2 very difficult games. This past year, they only had 1 true tough road environment, and that was Ohio State. I think the Michigan game is a very underrated win. Even before Michigan beat Ohio State, I thought that win meant a lot, but it was at home. You have to go to Penn State, very well could be the whiteout. You've got to go to Oregon, a very difficult, very, 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 very difficult environment out west, especially now that they're in the Big Ten and competing as high a level as they are. The same was true for Rourke, and we saw how that went. Right, Rourke was awesome. He was incredible at home. He was incredible against opponents at a similar to or lower level. But what happened when Rourke played Ohio State? He got flustered. He got attacked by that pass rush, and the secondary wasn't letting much space open up for those receivers either. And Rourke got flustered. And yes, Indiana was competitive in that game for a time, but they ended up having truly no chance. And the same happened against Notre Dame, that Notre Dame secondary. Again, Ohio State and Notre Dame, two of the best defenses in the country, two of the best secondaries in the country, two of the best front sevens in the country, flustered Rourke and put him in a situation where he didn't feel like he had much that he could do, and it didn't feel like Indiana could do anything offensively against either one of those schools until, of course, we got to garbage time. 27-17 loss to Notre Dame was not a 27-17 loss. That was a much worse game for the Hoosiers than it appears. A couple of those scores happened in garbage time. Same with the Ohio State game. 38-15. It was worse than that, to be totally honest with you there. So Rourke got flustered. When he was playing those elite defenses on the road, it happened twice. Ohio State and Notre Dame, Indiana fell apart and they couldn't do anything offensively. That's the one thing that Indiana needs to change. That's the one thing that Indiana needs to do better. They did everything perfectly all year long. They destroyed teams, Purdue, Nebraska, but all those inferior opponents you can beat up on as much as you want. What happens when you have to go on the road against a top-tier caliber defense? If the college ball playoff system stays the same, it's likely that Indiana will have to do it 3 times, right? If they were to get in, right, they would have to do it 3 times. Go on the road, most likely to a very raucous environment against a very proficient defense. Can the quarterback pick apart that defense? Probably not, but can they at least hold their own? I hope so, because Rourke couldn't do it against Ohio State or Notre Dame, and I worry that Mendoza won't be able to do it against Penn State or Oregon either, considering the fact that we haven't seen him be asked to do anything like that yet. Now, that doesn't mean that he isn't capable of it. It just means he hasn't been asked to make that happen yet. He hasn't been asked to go into an environment like Oregon or Penn State and perform at a high level. It's not something that's on his resume so far. Same was true for Rourke. We had no idea how the Ohio State game would go. It started off very well and went off the rails very quickly. The Notre Dame game was similar, except that one didn't start off well. That one just fell off the rails right away, and there was nothing the Hoosiers, it felt like, they could do. So Mendoza, that's my one concern. I think he's awesome. I think he's more mobile than Rourke. I think he throws the ball very efficiently. I think that Mendoza is a fantastic add, and he's one of the most highly coveted transfer quarterbacks for a reason, and Indiana landing him is a massive gold star on this transfer portal class and a massive reason for hope for 2025. 2024 might not have been a fluke. Cignetti might really be building the next powerhouse, and this ad in the transfer portal of Fernando Mendoza exemplifies that idea exactly. The question, though, is can he be effective against top-tier defenses? We don't know. The upside is he's a more long-term solution. He has 2 years of eligibility remaining. Like I said, last year was a 1-year project for Cignetti. Rourke had 1 season. If Rourke was returning, the question about the conversation around IU might have been very different prior to this transfer occurring, right? Because you have a quarterback who now has played Ohio State and lost, now has gone to the playoff and fallen off the rails against Notre Dame, and still has beaten up on Nebraska and Purdue and Western Illinois and whoever else was on that schedule. Now he returns for a second year and potentially has an opportunity to make it happen again. This is a long-term investment for Cignetti. Mendoza coming in for 2 years assures that they're going to have a high-level quarterback most likely for the next 2 years. It means that when Cignetti is reloading this roster and rebuilding this roster, he can do so around Mendoza for 2 years rather than just the one where it's a 1 year, put together as many high-quality players as you possibly can and see what happens. It's not the case anymore. Now you got some Power 5 transfers coming in. A great example is, of course, Mendoza. And all of a sudden, this team in Indiana, this program, is starting to develop longevity. And Mendoza allows them to have more longevity because he's going to be around for 2 years, whereas Rourke was only around for 1. So he's going to build a core roster. Cignetti's going to build a core roster that will make up the next 2 years rather than just the one, potentially giving Mendoza 2 shots to, sure, maybe he falls off the rails against Oregon and Penn State the same way Rourke did, but then he has a second year to bounce back from that. And that is what is going to allow Cignetti to have more wiggle room and more room from error, more room to learn, and more room and more time to take Indiana to the next level, as if he hasn't taken Indiana to unforeseen levels and unforeseen heights already. It's a good day to be a Hoosier. It's a good day to be a Hoosier, an Indiana Hoosier, I should say, an Indiana University Hoosier. And as the Colts fall apart and break all of our hearts, the Pacers give us hope, the Indiana Hoosiers give us hope, and I'm very, very excited to see how Fernando Mendoza does next season, especially early on against teams like Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, even those conference games against Illinois and Iowa. What happens as Mendoza ramps up towards that Oregon game, the same way Rourke ramped up towards really the Nebraska game, but truly the Ohio State game. If Indiana is able to expand upon their successes this year, if they're even able to match their successes this year, the idea that Cignetti might be the next Nick Saban would be very much in the conversation, and Mendoza is a major piece that is going to help that narrative have a chance of being true.